Joe Biden's prices and his hikes cost a typical American family an estimated $33,000 and hit your workers and your customers and your small businesses.
900,000 Americans went to sleep last night in RVs because they had nowhere else to go. And in December, a quiet court decision turned that last shelter into a countdown. No headlines, no warnings, just tow trucks, notices, and a deadline. This isn't about camping laws. It's about what happens when survival itself becomes illegal. Roughly 900,000 people in the United States now live full-time in RVs, vans, and converted vehicles not by choice, but because traditional housing has become unreachable. Median U.S. rent increased over 30% since 2020, while wages rose far less. In many metro areas, rents climbed $500 to $900 per month in under 3 years. For households earning under $60,000, the math stopped working. RVs became the final affordable structure people could buy outright or finance cheaply. Unlike apartments, RVs do not require credit checks, background checks, security deposits, or first and last month payments that now exceed $6,000 to $10,000 in many cities. The RV population includes working parents, seniors on fixed incomes, veterans, disabled adults, and people with full-time jobs who simply lost access to leases. Census-adjacent housing studies show that vehicle dwellings surged after eviction moratoriums ended, with RV registrations increasingly tied to residential zip codes rather than recreational travel corridors. These are not transient populations. School enrollment records, job locations, medical appointments, and public transit routes anchor RV dwellers to specific neighborhoods. RVs became substitute apartments in cities that failed to build enough affordable housing units. This matters because when cities treat RVs as optional recreation, they ignore the reality that for hundreds of thousands of Americans, the RV is not transportation, it is the only remaining roof they control. In December, a federal court ruling clarified that cities are not constitutionally blocked from enforcing anti-camping and vehicle habitation laws, even when shelter capacity is insufficient. The ruling did not order cities to act. It did not mandate towing. What it did was remove a legal hesitation that had constrained enforcement for years. Previously, municipalities feared lawsuits under constitutional protections related to cruel and unusual punishment and due process when enforcing bans against people with no alternatives. The court determined that lack of shelter does not automatically prevent enforcement. This shifted the legal risk calculation overnight. City attorneys who once warned councils to proceed cautiously now advise that enforcement is defensible. Municipal insurance carriers adjusted liability assessments. Risk managers now view inaction as more dangerous than action, especially where complaints and grant oversight exist. The ruling's language is narrow, technical, and easy to miss in public discourse, but its impact is broad. It effectively transferred discretion from courts to local governments. Cities now decide when, where, and how aggressively to act, with fewer federal constraints. This change is especially powerful because it does not require new legislation. Every existing ordinance that sat unused or selectively enforced can now be activated. The decision transformed RV enforcement from a legally risky move into an administratively protected one, and that shift is what triggered the nationwide acceleration. Before the ruling, cities often paused enforcement when shelters lacked capacity, fearing constitutional challenges. The December decision explicitly states that shelter availability does not bar enforcement. This is critical because shelter systems are chronically undersupplied. Nationally, emergency shelters cover less than 40% of the unhoused population on any given night. In some cities, that figure drops below 20%. RV dwellers rarely qualify for family shelters, pet-friendly shelters, or disability-accessible facilities. Yet enforcement can now proceed regardless. This means a city with 500 RV households and 30 shelter beds can legally clear all 500. The ruling reframes homelessness as a regulatory issue rather than a capacity issue. It allows municipalities to say, enforcement is about public safety and compliance, not housing solutions. Practically, this removes the last brake on large-scale sweeps. Officials no longer need to demonstrate alternatives before acting. The legal standard now prioritizes municipal authority over individual circumstance. This creates a system where displacement is legal even when relocation is impossible. The ruling does not require cruelty, but it permits outcomes where cruelty is structurally unavoidable. That is why enforcement timelines are now accelerating across states simultaneously. Cities can act without proving they have anywhere for displaced people to go. One of the most consequential changes is the widespread classification of RV habitation as an ongoing public nuisance. This designation activates an entirely different enforcement toolbox. Nuisance law allows cities to remove property without the procedural protections typically required for eviction. It also enables expedited towing, administrative fines, and cleanup contracts without criminal charges. Once an RV is labeled a nuisance, the focus shifts from the person inside to the object itself. This distinction matters. Property classified as a nuisance can be removed even if it is legally owned, registered, and insured. Municipal codes often define nuisance broadly: obstruction, sanitation concerns, visual blight, or prolonged stationary presence. These standards are subjective and unevenly applied. When RVs fall under nuisance enforcement, citations stack quickly. Each notice adds fees. After a threshold, sometimes 48 to 72 hours, removal becomes automatic. This process bypasses housing courts entirely. It treats the RV like debris, not a residence. That legal framing is what allows cities to clear entire corridors rapidly. It also limits appeal options, because nuisance enforcement is administrative, not judicial. Once applied, reversal is rare. This classification is the engine behind mass towing operations. It reduces complex human situations to simple property removal procedures. Federal and state funding now plays a major role in enforcement timing. Infrastructure grants, housing stabilization funds, and urban revitalization programs increasingly require demonstrated reduction of visible encampments. Progress reports often include metrics such as vehicles removed, corridors restored, and nuisance sites resolved. Cities competing for millions in funding face pressure to show measurable outcomes quickly. Clearing RVs produces immediate, photographable results. Building housing does not. This creates a perverse incentive structure. A city can tow 300 RVs in a month and report success, even if 0 people are housed afterward. Grant reviewers rarely track displacement outcomes. They track removal statistics. As a result, enforcement becomes financially rewarded. This is not always explicit, but it is baked into evaluation frameworks. Municipal departments know which metrics matter. When funding renewal depends on visible change, tolerance declines. This funding dynamic explains why enforcement often clusters around redevelopment zones, waterfronts, downtown corridors, and tourist districts. The ruling made these strategies legally safer. Funding pressure made them politically attractive. Together, they created the current surge. Cities are incentivized to remove people rather than house them because removal shows up favorably in grant applications and renewal requests. The system rewards appearances over actual solutions. Court rulings do not move tow trucks by themselves. What matters is how the language is interpreted inside city government. After the December decision, legal departments issued internal guidance explaining that enforcement of vehicle habitation bans now carried significantly lower constitutional risk. These summaries traveled quickly through City Hall. Risk managers revised liability assessments. Insurance carriers updated coverage assumptions. What had once been considered legally sensitive became administratively routine. Departments that previously hesitated were told they could proceed. Public Works began identifying streets wide enough for tow equipment. Police were instructed to document RV locations and prior citations. Housing departments were asked to list available shelter beds, even when the number was symbolic rather than functional. None of this required new laws or public hearings. It happened through staff memos, emails, and briefings. Once planning reached this stage, enforcement became a scheduling exercise rather than a moral debate. Operations were assigned dates, contractors were notified, and over time budgets were approved. By the time notices appeared on windshields, decisions had already been made weeks earlier. For people living in RVs, enforcement felt sudden and arbitrary. In reality, it followed a quiet bureaucratic chain where legal interpretation hardened into operational orders. This is why similar crackdowns appeared across different cities at nearly the same time. Long before the December ruling, RV residents lived inside a dense web of overlapping restrictions. Parking limits that once allowed 72 hours dropped to 48 or 24 hours, forcing constant movement. Oversized vehicle bans removed most residential streets from legal parking options. Distance rules prohibited RVs from parking near schools, parks, and libraries, eliminating access to public restrooms and water. Sanitation ordinances required proof of waste disposal at licensed facilities, often costing $25 to $40 per visit, and located far outside city limits. Registration and insurance rules became traps. A tag expired by a single day could trigger citations. Insurance companies quietly canceled policies when vehicles were used as dwellings, leaving residents unknowingly uninsured. Each rule existed independently, but together they created a system that demanded constant compliance. Any disruption, illness, mechanical failure, job schedule changes meant falling out of compliance. Citations stacked quickly, creating a paper trail that later justified towing. This maze did not remove people all at once. It wore them down. It consumed time, money, and energy just to remain barely legal. The December ruling did not create this environment. It allowed cities to enforce it without restraint. What had been difficult became impossible. Recreational vehicles are uniquely vulnerable to enforcement because they are large, visible, and immobile. They occupy curb space that businesses, homeowners, and city planners care deeply about. Unlike tents, RVs cannot be folded and relocated quickly. Their size makes them easy to document, cite, and remove in bulk. From an enforcement perspective, RVs offer efficiency. One tow operation can remove dozens of households in a single morning. There is also a financial incentive. Towing RVs generates immediate revenue through contracts, impound fees, and fines. Clearing tents does not. Visibility matters as well. A row of RVs signals housing failure in a way cities find uncomfortable, especially near downtown corridors, waterfronts, and redevelopment zones. RVs disrupt marketing images used to attract investors and tourists. Families living inside them face another disadvantage. Once an RV is classified as a public nuisance, it loses recognition as a home. Family status offers no protection under nuisance law. Children inside do not stop enforcement. In practice, this means families in RVs are easier to displace than almost any other unhoused group. Their stability makes them more visible, and that visibility makes them targets. The very characteristics that made RVs practical shelter also make them enforcement priorities. Families living in RVs experience consequences that extend far beyond the loss of a vehicle. When an RV is towed, children lose access to school supplies, medications, clothing, and familiar routines. School attendance becomes unstable overnight. Parents may be forced to separate temporarily, sending children to relatives or friends while they search for shelter. This fragmentation increases stress and emotional strain. Research consistently shows that housing instability in childhood correlates with higher anxiety, sleep disruption, and academic decline. Parents face constant fear of scrutiny. As enforcement increases, simply being visible in an RV can feel risky. Parents worry that repeated citations or displacement could draw the attention of child welfare agencies, even when children are fed, clean, and attending school. The loss of an RV also destroys the logistical systems families rely on. Transportation to work and school becomes harder. Commuting distances increase. Missed shifts and tardiness threaten employment. None of these outcomes appear in enforcement statistics. Official reports record vehicles removed, not families destabilized. Yet the impact on children often lasts far longer than the enforcement operation itself. For many families, the tow is not a reset. It is the beginning of long-term instability that affects education, health, and family cohesion for years. Veterans and disabled individuals rely on RVs for reasons shelters cannot easily accommodate. Many require private space to manage chronic pain, mental health conditions, or mobility limitations. RVs allow storage of medications, medical equipment, and personal belongings that shelters restrict. Service animals further limit shelter access, as many facilities do not allow them. Disability income and veterans benefits often range between $1,200 and $1,600 per month, far below market rents in most cities. RVs provided a rare form of controlled, accessible shelter within those budgets. When enforcement escalates, these individuals face disproportionate harm. Towing an RV can interrupt medication schedules, eliminate safe sleeping surfaces, and force people into environments that worsen health conditions. Emergency room visits increase after displacement, raising public health costs. VA housing programs exist but are oversubscribed, with long waiting lists. The system assumes short-term displacement can be absorbed. For disabled veterans, it cannot. Losing an RV often means losing the last environment they could physically manage. Enforcement treats all vehicles equally. bodies are not equal in their ability to absorb the shock. What appears as simple property removal becomes a health crisis for populations already managing complex medical needs. The consequences extend far beyond homelessness into medical deterioration. Older Americans are one of the fastest growing groups living full-time in RVs. Many entered vehicle living after rent increases outpaced fixed incomes. The average Social Security retirement benefit is roughly $1,900 per month, while average rents in many metro areas exceed $2,000 for a one-bedroom. Once seniors lose an RV to towing, recovery is nearly impossible. Unlike younger households, they cannot take on extra shifts, relocate easily, or rebuild savings. Impound fees escalate quickly. A typical tow costs $500 to $1,200, followed by daily storage fees that can reach $60 to $120 per day. Within 2 weeks, totals often exceed $3,000 to $5,000. Seniors rarely have access to credit or family financial support. Housing waitlists for age-restricted affordable units routinely stretch 5 to 10 years. Assisted living is far beyond reach, often costing $6,000 to $9,000 per month. When an RV is removed, seniors lose not only shelter, but continuity of medical care, medication storage, and neighborhood familiarity. Shelters are often unsafe or inaccessible for older adults. The enforcement system assumes temporary displacement. For seniors, displacement is usually permanent. Once the RV is gone, there is no realistic path back to independent housing. Age makes recovery impossible. Towing an RV is not comparable to towing a car. RVs function as homes, but impound systems treat them as abandoned property. To recover a vehicle, owners must provide valid registration, insurance, and full payment of all fees up front. Payment plans are rare or non-existent. Storage fees accrue daily. Even a short delay can double the cost. Many RV dwellers lose insurance before towing due to policy cancellations tied to residential use. Without insurance, release is impossible. After statutory holding periods, sometimes as short as 30 days, vehicles are auctioned or destroyed. Personal belongings are technically recoverable, but access is limited to brief windows, often 15 to 30 minutes under supervision. Most people lack transportation or strength to retrieve everything. Documents, tools, and medications are frequently lost. Once sold, the RV cannot be reclaimed. There is no housing replacement program attached to towing. The system offers no appeal based on hardship. This is why enforcement operates as a one-way door. For most people, a tow is not a citation. It is the irreversible loss of their last shelter. The impound system was designed for abandoned vehicles, not occupied homes, but it applies the same rules regardless of human presence. After enforcement operations, official narratives focus on restored sidewalks and reduced complaints. What happens to people afterward is rarely tracked. Displacement does not reduce homelessness. It redistributes it. Former RV residents move into tents under freeways, overcrowded apartments, unsafe couchsurfing arrangements, or isolated rural areas far from services. Some disappear entirely from counts because they avoid visible locations. Families split apart to stay temporarily housed. Workers lose jobs due to transportation disruption. Health conditions worsen as stability disappears. These outcomes do not appear in enforcement reports. Success metrics measure vehicles removed, not lives stabilized. This creates a false impression of progress. The crisis becomes less visible, not smaller. By removing RVs from prominent corridors, cities reduce political pressure while increasing individual risk. Emergency services often see higher long-term costs through hospitalizations and crisis interventions. The system externalizes harm while internalizing credit. Clearing streets does not solve housing shortages. It shifts suffering out of sight. People still exist, but they exist in more dangerous, less accessible conditions. The problem is not solved. It is simply relocated to places where fewer people witness it or complain about it. Enforcement leaves a paper trail that follows people long after displacement. Citations tied to nuisance abatement, sanitation, or vehicle habitation enter municipal databases. Unpaid fines accrue interest and penalties. In some jurisdictions, these records are searchable by housing authorities or appear in background screenings. A vague notation about prior code violations can derail rental applications without explanation. Employers conducting background checks may see unresolved municipal issues. This creates a secondary punishment that extends beyond the loss of shelter. Even years later, individuals may be denied housing or employment without knowing why. The records do not specify circumstances. They do not explain that someone lost their home to enforcement. They simply flag past violations. Clearing RVs does not reset lives. It embeds disadvantage into administrative systems that quietly close doors. The ruling did not mandate this outcome, but by accelerating enforcement, it expanded the number of people affected by these downstream barriers. Once entered into databases, these records become permanent obstacles. They prevent people from accessing the very housing that could end their homelessness. The enforcement creates its own cycle, making future stability harder to achieve, even as it claims to restore order to public spaces. RV enforcement produces winners even as it displaces vulnerable populations. Property owners see improved curb appeal. Developers gain cleaner corridors for investment pitches. Tourism boards regain postcard-ready views. Cities demonstrate control to state and federal funders. These benefits are not hidden conspiracies. They are structural incentives. Visible homelessness reduces perceived property value and deters investment. Removing RVs restores market confidence. The people displaced are rarely stakeholders in decision-making. Their losses do not factor into cost-benefit analyses. When success is measured by appearance and compliance, enforcement aligns naturally with economic interests that prioritize aesthetics and growth over housing access. No one needs to explicitly choose harm. The system rewards outcomes that push the poorest residents aside. Real estate markets respond positively to enforcement. Investors prefer areas that appear orderly and controlled. Grants flow to cities that demonstrate visible progress. Public satisfaction rises when complaints decrease, even if the underlying problem worsens elsewhere. The beneficiaries are those with property, capital, and political influence. The costs fall on those with none of those things. This alignment is not accidental. It reflects whose voices matter in municipal decision-making and whose interests shape policy priorities. Enforcement serves those who already have shelter. The December court decision did not create RV homelessness. It removed hesitation. It transformed enforcement from a discretionary act into a scheduled one. As housing shortages worsen and rents continue to rise, more people will turn to vehicles. Unless housing supply expands dramatically, enforcement will chase symptoms, not causes. Each sweep teaches cities that removal is easier than solutions. Timelines replace deliberation. What is happening now is not a conclusion. It is an acceleration phase. The countdown many RV residents feel is real, not because of a single ruling, but because the system now moves faster than their ability to adapt. Cities are learning that enforcement carries minimal political cost when framed as public safety or compliance. The legal risk is gone. The funding incentives are aligned. The administrative machinery is in place. This creates momentum that is difficult to reverse. Meanwhile, the underlying crisis deepens. Rent continues rising faster than income. Affordable housing construction lags far behind need. Waiting lists grow longer. The number of people priced out of traditional housing increases monthly. Enforcement addresses none of these root causes. It simply removes the most visible evidence of housing failure. As long as that remains true, sweeps will continue. They will accelerate. They will expand to new cities and new populations. This is not the end of RV homelessness. It is the beginning of a more aggressive, coordinated, and legally protected phase of displacement. A system that can erase a home overnight will keep doing it until someone notices. If you've lived this or witnessed it, share your experience in the comments. And watch our next video, where we break down what happens next after the RVs are gone, and where people are actually being pushed.